Do you like scary stories? Ones that make you shiver at night? Ones that are for elementary school kids? I've been a fan of Goosebumps ever since I was a kid, and for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been collecting the books and rereading them. And you'd be surprised how many Goosebumps books there actually are. Like, as a kid, I only knew 3 series. I only knew the original one, the Give Yourself Goosebumps one, which was like a Choose Your Own Adventure series, and Series 2000. And when also in elementary school, the Horrorland series was just starting to come out as well. Once I started looking into them and researching them and thrifting for them, I never realized there would be almost about 200 of these things. There are a lot of Goosebumps books. It's been a lot of time and money trying to collect all of the main ones that I want to read. But now that I've started collecting them, I've been kind of wanting to all compile them into one ranking and compile them into one list. And I decided to do that here on my YouTube channel. I'm pretty far into my Goosebumps collecting, so I'm going to have to reread some of them, but I don't mind. And today, we are starting off with book number 2 from Series 2000, Bride of the Living Dummy. So just so you know, this review is not going to be a spoiler-free review. I am going to go over the basic main story beats and summarize them pretty briefly. So I'm not going to go over everything in the book, just the main story beats. And then at the end, we'll go over what I thought of it and where I think the book falls within my ranking. Bride of the Living Dummy starts with our protagonist, Jillian, and she's feeding her pet lizard, Petey. She's feeding them some dead flies, and she's interrupted by her 2 younger twin sisters, Amanda and Katie, who are both 6 years old. And they barge into her room, talking about their own doll they have named Mary Ellen. She's on the cover. And the younger sisters are talking like, "Oh, we can stay up till midnight tonight because Mary Ellen said so." And Jillian's like, "Oh my god, just get the doll out of here. I hate this freaking doll, right? I hate Mary Ellen." And then the sisters are like, "Well, Mary Ellen hates you, and Mary Ellen hates that stupid lizard too." Jillian just brushes them off and she's like, "Whatever." And as she's trying to go to sleep that night, the sisters try to pull a prank on her, and Jillian's like, "Oh my god, this is horrible." And that Saturday, Jillian and her friend Harrison, bringing the twins in tow and Mary Ellen, they head to a puppet show that night, hosted by a ventriloquist named Jimmy O. James and his dummy Slappy. Now, obviously, we know Slappy, and the show goes on normally, but then Slappy starts taking control of the show, insulting Jimmy a bunch, and, everyone thinks it's part of the act and everyone finds it funny, but not Jimmy. Jimmy is audibly hurt. He's frowning. He's trying to get Slappy to another topic. He's trying to get Slappy to stop the mean insults. But Slappy isn't going to stop. And eventually, the 2 twin sisters go to the stage when Jimmy asks for some members from the audience, and Slappy insults them too. The sisters don't find this very funny, however, and they go backstage to try and find Jimmy O. James himself to give them a piece of their mind. So Jillian's like, "Oh my god, my annoying sisters cannot be doing this again." So she goes backstage to try and find them. But what she finds instead is Jimmy O. James and Slappy in their sort of green room arguing with each other. And eventually, during this discourse, Slappy actually hits Jimmy O. James and causes him to bleed. And Jillian's shocked by what she's seeing. She's like, "Is that dummy moving? Is Jimmy O. James actually having an argument with his own dummy?" So she stays there just watching. And eventually Jimmy takes notice and goes out to talk to her. But every time Jillian throws an accusation at him, Jimmy just denies it. And eventually Jillian just thinks nothing of it and goes home. But when she returns home, however, she finds Slappy sitting on the couch. But it's just Harrison taking control of Slappy. And Jillian's like, "Where'd you get that? How'd you get that?" And Harrison explains that he went out back and found Slappy lying in the trash, abandoned. And Jillian thinks this is very odd, because she just saw Jimmy O. James talking with Slappy, so why would Slappy be discarded and thrown in the trash? Harrison says they can keep the dummy, and maybe her dad can even fix it, because her dad does a bit of woodwork. And Jillian begrudgingly agrees. The next day, they go to the magic store preparing for a birthday act they're going to do at a neighbor's house. And Jillian returns home from the store, only to find her beloved pet lizard Petey missing from its cage. She looks everywhere for him, and eventually the whole family gets in on it. And the family blames the young sisters for this prank because they see Slappy hanging over the cage with the lid of it broken in half. But the sisters keep denying everything, and eventually the parents make them put Mary Ellen away in the closet. But after all this discourse, Petey suddenly climbs out of Slappy's mouth, and he's fine. The whole ordeal is over, and it's just an odd occurrence. That weekend, after Jillian and Harrison flop a birthday party act as clowns, they decide on their next venture and decide it should be a ventriloquist act. But they don't know the next thing about ventriloquist dummies or where to even get one, so they find Jimmy O. James's address and head to his house. But when they get there, it's in this super bad part of town, and Jimmy's house looks super disgusting and abandoned, even with cockroaches all over the place. The only thing he's left behind is a journal, which is about Slappy, and it explains that Slappy was actually made by a sorcerer who made him out of coffin wood and cast a spell that could wake him up with some ancient words, which are the iconic Karu, Mari, Odana, Loma, that stuff. Jillian thinks the whole place is weird, and a neighbor comes in to check on if things are okay. And the neighbor explains that Jimmy just up and left, said he was going on a tour, but doesn't really seem that way. Seems like he just found an excuse to leave. The whole ordeal is a bit weird, and they return home empty-handed. And when Jillian goes up to her room, she sees Slappy sitting on the mirror near her bed, and on the mirror it's written, "Where's my bride?" in lipstick. After that, Slappy seems to go wild in the house and creates a bunch of other messes, and Jillian's parents ground her and the twin sisters for making a mess of the house while they were away, and even condemned the birthday party that Jillian was supposed to attend next weekend to their basement instead of the family's basement. So when the time comes for the party, they're ready with Mary Ellen as their first ventriloquist and a new doll they just bought that's pretty old for their other ventriloquist dummy. But when they open the suitcase, they find Slappy instead. And the kids are rioting, everything's going wrong, and Harrison's just like, "You know what, Jillian? I know you don't like the dummy, but let's just use the dummy." So, begrudgingly, once again, Jillian takes Slappy and uses him for the act. And everything goes fine. But, as usual, Slappy has to cause his mayhem and starts throwing up green goo all over the kids in the party. Eventually, Jillian tries to put a stop to it, but Slappy exclaims that he's gonna hurt the kids if he doesn't get his bride, which he declares to be Jillian. Jillian is his bride. And just as Slappy is going to grab Jillian by the wrist, Mary Ellen suddenly comes to life. And Jillian's twin sisters reveal that Mary Ellen has been alive the entire time she's been at their house, ordering the twins to do whatever they want, which is why the twins are always like, "Mary Ellen said this, Mary Ellen said that." And she even said that she would hurt the twins if they didn't do what she wanted. She was also the person who made everyone think Slappy was the one messing things up. But in reality, it was Mary Ellen setting up the pranks, and Slappy hasn't even been alive until this party. Slappy and Mary Ellen continue to fight over who is whose bride, because Mary Ellen wants Slappy to be his husband, but Slappy wants Jillian to be his bride. They scuffle all over the gooby basement and eventually make their way into the father's workplace, where Slappy turns on the saw blade and attempts to shred Mary Ellen in half. And it does actually work, but not before Mary Ellen can grab Slappy and drag him into the saw blade as well, slicing both of them in half and bringing their reign of terror to an end. However, just when things seem to have calmed down, Harrison is reading the journal that was at Jimmy O. James's house. And it says that even if Slappy's physical body is destroyed, his spirit carries on. And that's when Jillian turns to her twin sisters and spews green goo all over them. So, what did I think about this book? Well, it's just your classic Night of the Living Dummy book. Dummy does antics, Dummy comes to life, sprays green goo all over people, and Dummy is defeated, but comes back somehow. It's kind of the roadmap for all the Night of the Living Dummy books. But this one does some kind of unique things. It at least has a slightly more interesting concept. And I like the twist of Mary Ellen having been the one pulling all the strings instead of some some other family member or some friend being like, "Oh, well, I did it because you didn't do this," or something like that. And the dynamic between Jimmy O. James and Slappy on stage, while it's super short, it's described pretty well, and it's a nice juxtaposition between Jimmy O. James being genuinely frightened while he's on the stage trying to perform for these kids, and everyone in the audience thinking it's just part of the joke. It's a very it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's described pretty nicely within the book. But other than that, it's honestly a pretty middle of the road Night of the Living Dummy book. It doesn't do anything horrendous, but it also doesn't do anything that stands out too much either. I just thought it was a pretty average book. But Slappy trying to be a bride with a 12-year-old girl is slightly concerning. So before we rank the book, I just want in I just want to get into how my ranking system works. So I have 6 tiers of ranks. I have the S tier, where if you've seen tier lists before, you know that the S tier is where all the really, really good stuff goes. It's the stuff I enjoy a lot, and I definitely read it again. The A tier is where some pretty good books go. You know, they didn't they may not have wowed me too much, but they're still pretty good, and I would read them again too. The B tier is the middle of the road tier, where in my mind, once I start a book and before I grow opinions on it, every book starts in the B tier. And the B tier is not a bad place to be in per se. I mean, it's above the halfway point, but it's still middle of the road. Books I thought were fine. The C tier, however, is where things start to go a little sour. The C tier is where books go if I kind of enjoyed them, but they have some problems. And the D tier is kind of an extension of that. Books that I think aren't that good and maybe I wouldn't read them again. Now, the E tier is kind of legendary because the E tier is where the garbage goes. Straight garbage. Books I would never touch again in my life. And unfortunately, there are some books in that tier that I am going to have to touch again. And we'll get there when we get there. There's some pretty bad books down there. But that's how I rank my books. So, where does Bride of the Living Dummy go? Well, like I said, it's a pretty inoffensive Night of the Living Dummy book, and it has some interesting twists on the formula, but nothing that wows me too much. So, I'm going to give it a B tier for now. Well, I hope you enjoyed my first little review of a Goosebumps book on the channel. I'm going to try to make these as nice as I can because I really do enjoy Goosebumps, and I think R.L. Stine is a great author. He puts out some really good content, And a lot of these Goosebumps books, even going back to them while even going back to them in my late teens, some of them are surprisingly still really good, and they've aged nicely. You know, Goosebumps has always been expanding my creativity and fueling my imagination, just as I'm sure it has for tons of other kids. And I hope to get more kids and even other adults and teenagers like me to get them to read these books too, because there are some fun things about these books, and they've had a pretty big impact on my life. So, that being said, our next book is going to continue with the Series 2000 series, and it's going to be Slappy's Nightmare, a pretty rare book to find these days. So, I hope you enjoyed this little review, and I'll see you for the next one.